Good to have all. There we go. That's what I was waiting for. Okay, good to have all of you with me over here. We are on Chav Gimel Amud Beis, that is 23b. And God willing, we will be finishing Maseches Makkos very imminently. After this week, we only have one more daf to go. And so, therefore, I want to just remind everyone that we have a Siyum, God willing, planned on Sunday, December 12th at 10:30 p.m. There is a sign-up link on the shul.
Is that p.m. or a.m.?
Oh, a.m., my mistake. A.m. In the morning, it's a brunch. And everyone here is invited. And you could even invite family that want to celebrate it with you as well, or a close friend. Just make sure, please RSVP. That way we order enough food for everybody. So that's all that I ask. Okay? But otherwise...
Rabbi, there's no class Thanksgiving, correct?
Very good, Toby. Thank you. This coming Thursday, I actually, Marissa and I are taking the weekend off. And it works out because we were going to finish Makkos like 2 weeks before the Siyum, and we just have an awkward pause between finishing the Masech and the Siyum anyway. So there won't be a shiur next week. We'll pick it up, God willing, right afterwards, and that'll bring us straight to the Siyum. And a reminder, our next Masechta is Megillah. So if you want to get yourself a Gemara to be ready for next Masechta, I would say get your hands on one now because Daf Yomi is about to get up to Megillah, and I've been trying to order Megillah Sfarim, and they're all out of stock. So if you can get your hands on an Art Scroll Megillah, I advise doing that as soon as you can. Okay.
Rabbi,
but if you come in person to the shul, we have a few copies, so there's nothing to worry about.
I've never been to a Siyum. What is the format of it? What is it like besides you mentioning food?
Well, that, during the 9 days, that's the ikr. The whole point is the food. God forbid. Basically, it's a Sudas mitzvah. We have a meal, we celebrate, and then I'll teach the final lines in the Masechta and the Gemara, share some thoughts, and then there's a special passage that we say, and there's a Kaddish at the end, which is also important. We want at least 10 men to be at this meal. Otherwise, we can't say Kaddish. So if you are a man or you can invite men to join, we need at least 10 men. Otherwise, we can't do it. We can finish Masechta. We just can't. It'll be lackluster. There'll be some other speeches also. But that's the point. Okay.
All right.
So Chav Gimel Beis 23. We are.
We lost you.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was my audio or there you go. Okay.
No, it's me. I finally got a computer in my office and the webcam decided not to work. So now I'm on my phone and the internet here is not so good. So thank you for bearing with me. You can all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here we are in the Gemara 23b. I would imagine it's the second page in Art Scroll. So the beginning of the Gemara. If you recall, last time in the Mishnah, we established that if somebody commits a sin, which they would incur both Malkus, lashes, and Kares, divine excision, that's punishment by God. If a person receives Malkus, then that is understood to exempt them from getting kares. We had a discussion about Kimle B'Daramine a while back, so it's related, but not precise. Okay. Amar Rav Yochanan, Chalukin olav chavirav al Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel. Many of Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel's colleagues disagree with him. In other words, Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel said, if you get Malkus, don't worry, Hashem's not going to give you kares. But many of his colleagues said, well, then what's the point of God giving you Malkus and kares? Rather, you get Malkus, and then God, at whatever point, will give you kares, assuming you don't care to do proper tshuva for it. Amar Rav Bar Hava, Amri Beit Rav Taninan. There's a question that they asked in Beit Rav. It says in the Mishnah, Ein bein Shabbos liyom HaKippurim el shezez dono b'idei Adam v'zez dono b'karis. The only difference between Shabbos and Yom Kippur when it comes to the punishment is that Shabbos, Beis Din puts you to death, whereas on Yom Kippur, God gives you kares. God punishes you directly with death. Or whatever.
You're getting a head start on Megillah. That's a quote from the Mishnah Megillah.
Yeah, very good, very good. Right, so that's quoting Megillah Tav Zayin and Mebez. Excellent, Shkoach, Henry. By the way, you want to talk about references to Megillah? We're going to get an explicit reference to how the mitzvah Megillah was accepted in our Gemara today. So that was the shout out I had in mind, but you've got another one.
Kimo, right? Okay.
Exactly. Yes, that's a very fundamental one. Okay. So the question is, then Misa, if this is true, if what's true, if our premise is true, that that we know that the other rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Yochanan. So if Rabbi Yochanan is right, it should really say Aidi v'Aidi b'dei Adam. Really, right? Because Rabbi Yochanan was the one who says that when you get kares, when you get malchus, you don't get kares. But we see over here that on Yom Kippur, you are getting kares. So what's the deal over here? So Nachum bar Yitzchak Omer, ha-mani, Rabbi Yitzchaki, the Amar, Malchus b'chayve krisus leika, the Tanya Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, chayve krisus b'chlal hayu, v'lama yatzis kares b'achoso, l'adunu b'kares v'lo b'malchus. So let's back up and explain this. The question is, why do I need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that there are those who disagree with Rabbi, what's his name again? With Rabbi Hananiah ben Gamliel. It's evident from this Mishnah that there are those who hold that despite the fact that you get malchus for violating Yom Kippur, you still are getting kares as well. So it's very obvious. There's an explicit Mishnah that tells me I get kares, presumably despite the fact that I also get malchus. So why do I need Rabbi Yochanan to let us in on this secret that, by the way, some people disagree with Rabbi Hananiah ben Gamliel. Some people didn't get malchus and kares. This mission that tells me I get kares on Yom Kippur for violating Yom Kippur, presumably in addition to malchus, already implies that. So what's the chiddush? What would have I thought? Maybe this Mishnah isn't telling me that I get malchus and kares. Maybe the opinion of this Mishnah is that of Rabbi Yitzchak. What did Rabbi Yitzchak hold? Rabbi Yitzchak said the reason when you look in the parsha of the Arayos, where it talks about different forms of sexual sins, it mentions kares, it repeats it in the context of incest. Now, why did the Torah need to repeat itself? It's not repeating itself. It's to teach us that you get kares exclusively to the exclusion of malchus. So perhaps this Mishnah is telling me that I get kares on Yom Kippur only and not malchus as well. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan actually is teaching me something I would not know. I would have thought there are only two opinions out there. Either when you get malchus, when you get malchus, you don't get kares. Or Rabbi Yitzchak, you never get malchus. You always go straight to kares. But what about the opinion that says I get both kares and malchus? So I would not have known that such opinion existed had Rabbi Yochanan not told us that. So it's not obvious from that Mishnah. He needed to tell us that. That's one approach. The second answer given, Rav Ashi Amar Afilu Tima Rabbanon Ze Iker Zo B'dei Adam Ze Iker Zo B'dei Shemayim. Well, maybe it wasn't so obvious. It's not so obvious from the Mishnah. What's the Mishnah coming to say? The Mishnah is coming to tell us that this is what's going on over here. Really, Yom Kippur, in principle, is supposed to give me kares, but I get malchus, so I'm putter from kares. So really, the Mishnah actually fits according to Rabbi Hananiah ben Gamliel's opinion. Gamliel says, if you get Makkos, you are exempted from kares. But if I were to ask you, what is the primary consequence of violating Yom Kippur? I would say the primary consequence is kares. Gamliel happens to say that if you get Makkos, then don't worry, you're not going to get kares as well. But nonetheless, so the way the Mishnah wrote it down is you get kares for violating Yom Kippur. Practically speaking, that's likely not going to happen because you'll get Makkos or Beis Din. So this actually agrees with potentially Rabbi Gamliel. Therefore, you're going to have to come and tell us, by the way, there's an opinion that says not only is kares the primary punishment that's excluded by Makkos, but actually you get kares and Makkos, and getting Makkos will not exempt you from kares. So again, let's just summarize. What you want to know from this is three opinions. One opinion is Rabbi Gamliel, that if you get Makkos, you're exempted from kares. The opinion of the Rabbanan is you get Makkos and kares, and the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak is that you get kares and not Makkos. So basically, all three combinations are on the table. There's an opinion that represents each of them. And to brighten up your spirits, that is the most complicated part of the Gemara that we will have today. The rest of the Gemara is completely agadic in nature, non-halachic. There'll be some maybe halachic ideas that get referenced, but for the most part, it's a straight shot from here. All nice agadic ideas to reward us for our time, trudging through the third parak and attempting to understand everything. So here we go. The beginning of the end. That sounds more ominous. Here we go. Where do we leave off? Halacha Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel. The halacha, who do we paskin like? We have three opinions. We say the halacha is in the courts of Rabbi Hanania ben Gamliel that when one gets Makkos, they are exempted from kares. Wait a minute. I see.
How do you know that?
How do you ask in theology like that? Meaning, if I do something, let's say I go up to heaven and they say, there's like a machlokis. I'll just give you one example between Rambam and Ramban. In the afterlife, do we retain our bodies or are we just spirits? So, you can't go up to God and say, I paskin like the Rambam or I paskin like Ramban. God's going to decide one way or the other. It's not like halacha. Yeah, Toby.
I guess maybe I'm a little confused about actually what kares is. I mean, I've always thought of kares as that you're cut off from the Jewish community, but it doesn't just happen when you die. It happens when you're alive. So there are consequences. If you're in kares, people aren't supposed to associate with you. You're not supposed to get an aliyah in shul. I mean, it's not like people here wouldn't know, right? Or am I totally wrong about
it? Is harem. It is harem. I think you're talking about harem, not karet.
Right.
Karet is only after you die, only after you're dead.
There's a few opinions of what kares is. What you're describing sounds like excommunication, like cherem that Marina is referring to. Right. There is kares, which is a few opinions. One is that it's cutting your life unnaturally short. It can be cutting your children's lives unnaturally short. It can be cutting you off from the afterlife. And I remember in Shar HaGamul, we briefly touched on this, that the consequences could be in this world or the next world, but it's not a social excision. It's a metaphysical excision of sorts. So this is very much in God's hands, not in our hands. And that's why it says on Shabbos, when you violate it, you get punished b'dei Adam, by the hands of men. But on Yom Kippur, since the primary punishment is kares, that's by the hand of God. Okay?
So does Makkos in any way deal with cherem? Or where do we study about
Moed Katan has a fair amount of treatment of cherem and nidoi. I'm sure there are other places in Shas I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head, but my recollection is Moed Katan, actually, which we could put that on the list for after Megillah if you want.
Sure.
Just the beginning is a little technical, but that never scared us, right? That never stopped us.
Thank you, Marina. You're right. I was getting it mixed up.
Okay. But yeah, Moe Katan, it's and then Moe Katan, by the way, is the Masechta that we get pretty much all Hilchos Avelos, the laws of mourning from. So there's a lot of practical halachic elements to it. Okay, and Megillah also. Okay, so the Gemara actually answers this question. Amar Rabbi Yosef, and this is one of my favorite lines in all of Makkos. Man sagli la ba'asav Amar. Like, did you go up to heaven and ask them if you're going to still get kares? Like, this isn't something we paskin. We paskin what I should do. We don't paskin what God is going to do. That's up to God. Amar Le'abai, El-Adam Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Shoshan bar Asu Beis Shalmata, V'skimu Beis Shalmal Ayatam. No, this is akin to a statement that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi made, that there were 3 enactments that the earthly court decided on, and the heavenly court gave its approbation, it gave its haskama. Now, similarly over here, also the heavenly court gave its haskama to what we said. But still, that doesn't answer the question. Again, Matzot the law of Amar, who went up to heaven and came back and told us what they said. Ella Kroikar Darshinan, Hachinami Kroikar Darshinan. Rather, when we determine that what God decides, we don't have a way, we don't have a direct channel to know what Hashem paskin, so to speak, on something. But rather, what do we have? Well, God was kind enough to give us something called a Torah, and if we can mine the details of the Torah in a sophisticated manner based on our traditions, then we could begin to get an understanding, perhaps, of what God intends. Now, end of that piece of Gemara. But the Gemara said there were 3 times that the earthly court decided to enact something, and God put a stamp of approval on it. Aren't you kind of curious? What are these 3 times that the Gemara is alluding to? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because the Gemara is curious as well. Gufa, on this very matter, Amar Yeshua ben Levi, what are these 3 instances that God gave a stamp of approval? Elohein, Mikra Megillah, the reading of Megillah Esther on Purim, Ushel Shalom B'Shem, greeting somebody with the name of God, Bavas Meiser, and bringing Meiser to the Beis HaMikdash. And we'll elaborate on each and every one right now. Mikra Megillah. Where do we know that God agreed to us reading Megillah Esther on Purim? You see, Megillah Esther is not just simply a dirabbanan, a simple rabbinical enactment, but it has a bit of a higher status, and this is one of the reasons. The Siv, it's written in the Megillah, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. So the Jewish people, they were Kimu v'kiblu. What does it mean, Kimu v'kiblu? Kimu lemala masha kiblu lamata. That they upheld in heaven that which we accepted here on earth. In other words, we accepted to read Megillah Esther and Purim here on earth, and in heaven they accepted that as well. And we see that from the words of Kimu v'kiblu in the Megillah. That's number 1. Ushela Shalom B'Shem. Where do we get the idea of greeting somebody with the name of God? By the way, there's, if I remember, it's been many years, but when I was learning Mishnah Brura and the laws of Hashkamas HaBoker, so there's a question if one's allowed to greet somebody in the morning, especially by saying something like Shalom Aleichem, because Shalom is a name of God. So there's an imperative to greet somebody with God's name, perhaps, but also it's not necessarily appropriate to say in the morning before one goes to davening. So I think they recommend saying in Aramaic, Safra de Mori Tav. So it connects to this. Ushela Shalom, where we get the notion of greeting somebody with the name of God. The Siv, B'nei Boaz, Bami Beis Lechem, V'yomer L'kotzrim. Do we have any Sephardim with us here today? Anybody Sephardi? Anybody's spouse is Sephardi? Anybody's dog Sephardi? No?
Oh, before they have an aliyah, they say, right?
Very good. So Henry Goldberg remembers when David Cohen at 6:30 gets the aliyah. We all look forward to it because he gets up there and he says, Hashem imachem. So David Cohen didn't make that up, but rather it's traced back to Boaz and Sefer Rus. Boaz, when he was back in Beis Lechem, he says to those working in the fields, Hashem imachem, God be with you. And furthermore, an angel also said, Hashem imcha gibor achaya, that God be with you, O great man, a strong man of valor. Now, the question is, why did the first pasuk suffice? Boaz was a great tzaddik, no? Why do I need a second pasuk to prove the point? Maybe we might think that Boaz did this of his own accord, but maybe he was mistaken. He should not have invoked God's name to greet someone. Therefore, we needed a pasuk telling us that an angel of God invoked God's name to greet somebody. So too is appropriate for Boaz. Now, by the way, the Gemara doesn't ask the reverse question. Well, if I have the pasuk of the angel, why do I need a pasuk of Boaz? And I didn't see anyone who addressed it, but to me it seems that if an angel can do it, it doesn't need a human being to do it. So we need the pasuk that tells that Boaz also invoked God's name, lest we think that only angels can invoke God's name and not men. So therefore, we need Boaz and we need the pasuk of the angel as well. So that's my understanding. Finally, the third instance where heaven indicates that it accepts that which we did below. One of the favorite people who like encouraging or indoctrinating, or not, what's the word I'm looking for? Something between educating and indoctrinating, encouraging, whatever. Okay, basically those who advocate Aliyah, they'll generally turn to the story about how Ezra came up from Bavel, and he tried bringing people with him, but nobody wanted to go, and God was very angry at them. So apparently there were a lot of Levites who decided that they were happy in Babylonia, and they did not want to join the expedition to resettle Eretz Yisrael. And so Ezra was very upset with these people. And so what he wanted to do was to make a point. He penalized them, and he declared that instead of giving Meiser, giving a tithe to the Levites, which is generally what is done, rather just bring them to the temple, bring them to the Beis HaMikdash, and whichever Leviim and Kohanim are there, they can take part in it. So that was a form of a penalty. So where do we see this? Havas Meiser, the Siv. Haviu is called Meiser al Beis HaOtzar. It says in the pasuk that you shall bring all of your Meiser to the storage houses. The Tarab Beis, so that there are provisions in my house, in my temple. Ubechanuni nabezos amar Adonai Tzvaos imlo eftach lechem es arubos hashamayim varikosi lechem bracha avlidai. And test me, like the word bechina. Test me if I will not open for you the gates of heaven, the windows of heaven, and rain down blessing upon you, ad belidai. Now, what's ad belidai? What's die sound like? Right, like die, So no. My ad belidai, Amar Rami Bar Rav. Another one of my favorite lines from Makkos. They just happen to come toward the end. What can I tell you? That your lips will wear out from saying die, die. You're going to be getting so much blessing, you're going to get tired of the blessing. And tell God, please stop raining blessings upon us. Completely in jest and not to throw us off. This reminds me of a previous president of the United States who promised us, we're gonna be winning so much, you're going to get tired of winning. So lahavdil alpei havdalos. You're going to have so much blessing. You're going to say, die, die, die. We don't want any more blessings. So that's what Hashem promised us. And unlike human beings, God could actually, doesn't just make campaign promises, he could actually fulfill them. Okay. Hamavin Yavin, I guess. All right. Any questions at this point? Not about President Trump. All right. It's a Gadata. It's rather straightforward, but if anyone has any others, you can share. Now, Derech Agav, this is how Gemara conversations work. We just gave 3 cases, 3 examples of where the heavenly court put its stamp of approval on what we did down here. So now the Gemara is going to give us another set of 3 instances that are very similar. Amar Elazar v'gil l'komos hofia ruach hakodesh beistino shel Shem ubeistino shel Shmuel haramasi ubeistino shel Shlomo. So there are 3 instances where God made his opinion known in Beis Din, in the courts. The first example is the Beistino shel Shem, in the court of Shem. T'chsiv vayakir Yehuda. So remember, we know the story that Yehuda, what happened? So Yehuda's children, boys, are married to Tamar. Tamar, each and every one of them died. And so he didn't want to have Tamar marry his 3rd and final son. Tamar sees she's not getting him, even though he's come of age. So she dressed up as a prostitute, and they have relations with each other. But meanwhile, Tamar, due to being a prostitute and possibly committing adultery, there's a whole sugya about what exactly the Isser necessarily was. So she is going to be burnt at the stake until Vayakir Yehuda recognizes what's going on. Vayomer tzadka mimeni. He says she is correct. She is right. That the child will be from me. So mina yada. How do we know this? Dilma gihechita also ilagaba. Also nami in a. Why is Yehuda assuming that it's him? The same way that he made use of her services, so too another man also could have made use of her services. So why is he so confident that he's the culprit? So this is where we need God to intervene, because human deduction can only take us so far. Yatzis Baskel va'amra mimeni yatzis Kushem. A Baskel, a heavenly voice, came out and declared that it had come from Yehuda. That's how he did. So that's instance number 1, where God intervened in a court case. Number 2, the Beistino shel Shmuel, in the Shmuel Hanavi's Beis Din. The Chsiv. So at the end of Shmuel's life, when they wanted to get a king, and Shmuel was heading out, he's retiring. So Shmuel is very upset with the Jewish people, and so he says, "In the Anuvi neged Hashem v'neged Mashiach, you're going to testify. Are you going to complain about me in the presence of God and His Anointed One? Ashur milakachti. Have I stolen anything from you? I haven't taken anything from you. V'lomar lo ashaktan v'lo ritzosan. You haven't taken anything from us. You haven't robbed us. Vayomer aid Hashem ve'aid Mashiach. Now the issue here is that it says Vayomer aid. Vayomer is singular, but the entire Jewish people are talking. Vayomri violate. Really, it should say Vayomeru in plural. So who is speaking here? Not the Jewish people. Yotzas Baskel va'amra ani ate b'davar zeh. A heavenly voice came out and said, I am your witness. That's why it says Vayomer. Finally, Ve'dino shel Shlomo, in the court of Shlomo, to Siv, Vayan HaMelech. So this is the classic, I'm confident I can say famous answer. Famous story of Shlomo with the 2 women, and then the child he nearly split in half. Right? We know this one good. Vayan HaMelech Vayomer Tnu La Es HaYeled Hachai V'Ames Lo Semisuhu Kihi Imo. So Shlomo says he's about to split the baby, and then one of the women says, "No, give it to the other woman. I just don't want my baby to die." And Shlomo says, this must be the mother because she had mercy upon this child. She was willing to give him away. But really, Mina Yada, how did Shlomo Melech know this? Dilma Yerumi Arma. Maybe this woman, she knew that if she played the pitiful mother, that Shlomo Melech would give her the baby. So Yotzes Baskov Amrei Ima, a voice from heaven came out and said, "This is his mother." Which, by the way, that like detracts from the whole point of the story, which is about the wisdom of King Solomon, the wisdom of Shlomo Melech. In the end, it was just the heavenly voice that intervened that told us. So that kind of ruins the entire story when you think about it. It has nothing to do with King Shlomo's wisdom. It's just a baskol that came. Okay. Amar Rava Mimai. So now Rava is going to question all this. So what we did so far is we deduced from the psukim that God intervened in all three cases. But Amar Rava Mimai. Dilma Yehuda Kivin Nechashu Yarchid Yomi Bisrami Dechazina Machzakina Tolkazina Lo Machzakina. Maybe Yehuda just made a calculation. Yehuda didn't get any divine intervention. Yehuda just, he's like, look, I know that I had relations with her. It doesn't seem that anyone else did in the meantime. So chances are it's me. Also, Shmuel Nami. We see many times in the Torah that the Jewish people will speak in a singular voice. So it's not really the most, the most odd thing to see the Jewish people being referred to as a single unit in the singular. And then finally, Shlomo Nami, you know what? Maybe it really was Shlomo Melech recognizing that this woman was the true mother because she genuinely cared for the welfare of this child. So, okay, Ella Kamar. Rather, we have a tradition that this is how it went down. So apparently, that is how it went down. You don't have to derive from the psukim. We just have a tradition that was passed down from generation to generation that this is how the stories happened. So take it or leave it.
But okay. It's interesting on the second one, the Yisrael Nosha B'Hashem, that the Gemara picks that pasuk and not, for example, Vayichan Shem Yisrael Neged Ahar from Yisrael, which is the more common or reference to that. I just interesting that I don't know why it chose that pasuk.
Oh, interesting. Huh. That's a good point, Henry. Is that a question with a suggestion? Or
no, I'm just why I have no answer for it. I was just curious if there's a why it would have picked that pasuk. But whatever.
That's a very good question. Not seeing that here. So now I'm like taking out all my books on.
What pasuk? What pasuk instead?
Yisrael Nosha B'Hashem. That's was Yeshayahu. It's Yeshayahu Perak Memhei pasuk Yudzayin. So that's a good point. I mean, that's really funny. And like not even in the Torah, it goes to Sifrei Nevi'im to make that point. That's a good point. All right, I'll have to make a note to look that up.
Side question.
There's no footnote in my Mesivta.
No.
So they didn't even pick up on that. All right. Finally, guys, how many mitzvos are there in the Torah?
613.
Very 14. Good. It wasn't a trick question. Don't worry. This is not a trick question. How do we know that there are 613 mitzvos?
Right here it too.
Well, what?
Count them. You can count them.
Well, how do we know that what we're looking for is 613? Did everyone magically just come to the same number? So the answer is that they all base it on this passage in the Gemara. So this is a very important Gemara to just know that it exists. 613 wasn't something that Rambam or Sefer HaChinuch made up in medieval times, but they base it on this Gemara here in Makkos. Fine, this is the final passage. There are 613 mitzvos that were given to Moshe. 365 of them are negative commandments corresponding to the days of the year. And we have 248 positive mitzvos corresponding to the different limbs and in one's body. So Amar Rav Hamnuna, Maikra, Torah Tzilon Moshe Marasha. Where do we see 613? So in the pasuk, which tells us about Moshe giving us Torah. What is Torah? Torah, the gematria. Switching the page. What is the gematria of Torah? The numeric value is Shis Mea B'Chatzrei. So it's 611. But we have a Nochi Lo Yelecha Mipiad Fura Shema. But however, where the other two mitzvahs come from, because we have a tradition that at Matan Torah, when we receive the Torah, God initially started telling us the mitzvahs directly. We heard the voice of God, and then our souls left our bodies, and we realized that this ain't going to work. So God stopped dictating it, and then Moshe Rabbeinu took over from that point. So the first two of the 10 commandments, the Aseres HaDibros, those two statements were made by God, and then the other 611 were in the Torah by Moshe. So that brings us to basic arithmetic, 613 mitzvos. So we learned a lot of important ideas today. One is you can't really paskin theology in the sense that what God's going to do is what God's going to do, whether I decide one way or the other. So you can't really paskin that. We learned about 3 different instances where God put his seal of approval on a decision we made, as well as 3 different instances where God makes a guest appearance to help with a case in court. And then we learned also that there are 613 mitzvos. Of course, we knew that already, hopefully, but now we know the primary source for it. So again, reminder, next week we will not be meeting, we'll be on vacation. I'll be on vacation at least. And we'll pick it up afterwards. But again, please, please, please RSVP on the form on the website. If you cannot find it, you are more than welcome to email it to me. I'm more than happy to get you the link, though I think I sent it out already. And all of you are welcome to join us in person. I'll try to Zoom in if someone reminds me. And you're welcome to invite guests with you as well. Okay? Yashir Koach, everyone. A pleasure seeing all of you. Henry, I hope Chicago is going well. I'm glad you can be with us on the Zoom.
Rabbi, question. Next Thursday morning, yes, are you going to do the Thursday morning class, or you're not?
Oh, no, I should email that also.
It's on the list.
Wait for the whole Thursday.
It's on the list in the bulletin. So you need to let Matt know to take it off.
I'll email the group. All right.
Okay.
Good. Oh, the bulletin. Good point. All right. Yashir Koach, everyone.
Thank you.
Evening. Good Shabbos.
Thank you. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you. Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.